tone, please state your name.
Presentation mode is now enabled.
Okay, so welcome everybody, and thank you for joining this webinar. This month we are going to have a look at web services in PowerCenter and data quality and services. As you know, these webinars are a monthly initiative from the Informatica support team, where different support engineers are giving an overview of different products or specific options in the Informatica suite. You can always log into our support portal on mysupport.informatica.com or follow us on Twitter to get a heads up of what the next webinar in next month. So as I said, my name is Stijn Carrion. I'm actually based in the UK, and I'm a PowerCenter and data services subject matter expert. I've been working in Informatica Global Customer Support for 7 years now, and I'm mainly supporting PowerCenter and services and focusing on the new technologies that are being adopted by these products. So, as I said, all the phones will be muted. If you please post any questions you have in the chat window, and we'll get to those at the end of the session. After the webinar, you will be sent a link to the recording. And you will also get a small survey to give some feedback on this webinar. So let's get started with the agenda. It's a fairly straightforward agenda. As I said, we are going to look at web services, both from a PowerCenter and a data services and data quality point of view. And for both of these, we are going to look at either hosting web services, so creating web services, making web services available to other applications, as well as acting as a client, so consuming external web services from PowerCenter or data services and data quality. So what I'm planning to do is I will be going through some slides with some general information on both these topics, and I will be hopping to an environment of mine just to show you some quick demos of what the things look like in the product. And as I said at the end, we'll just do some Q&A on any questions that you might have on what has been presented, or if there's anything else that you would like to get some clarification on, you can just ask them. Okay, so first of all, PowerCenter. When we're talking about PowerCenter and web services, or more specifically hosting web services, we immediately have to talk about the Web Services Hub. If you currently are not using web services in your domain or in your environment, this would be the first thing to do for you, is setting up a Web Service Hub. The Web Service Hub will be the interface point for any of your external consumers that need to connect to PowerCenter and consume web services. So the Web Service Hub is responsible of processing SOAP requests and will work together or interact with the PowerCenter repository and the PowerCenter integration service to actually execute or retrieve metadata from those services. There are two types of web services we have in PowerCenter in the Web Services Hub. The first one is batch web services. Batch web services are some web services that are provided by PowerCenter and will allow to access metadata information, run workflows or monitor workflows that are running in your PowerCenter repository. And second part is a real-time web service. A real-time web service is any PowerCenter workflow that you are developing as a web service. So there are a few steps that you need to follow in order to allow a workflow to be enabled as a web service. But once those are there and exposed, we refer to these as real-time web services. So first of all, the batch web services. So for every one of you who is using PowerCenter, the batch web services are part of your PowerCenter installation, and there is no additional license required. So you can, if you have a default PowerCenter license, you can go and use this out of the box as soon as you create your web service hub. So what is this batch web service? Batch web service, the easiest way to compare it is it's actually some kind of PM-CMD, command line utility, and it will allow you to interact with the repository service and the integration service. Just like any of the other clients of the repository service, we do need authentication. So any of the users who are using these web services would authenticate as they would do using their username and password in the Informatica domain. Within these batch web services, we've got two types. We've got metadata services. Metadata services is just to retrieve some basic information from a repository. You can retrieve the folders, or you can retrieve workflows in folders. And then where it gets more interesting is the data integration web service. The data integration web service will allow you to start workflows, to schedule workflows, to monitor workflows, so directly interacting with the integration service. In terms of real-time web services, so the web services that you go and develop yourself, these are PowerCenter workflows. So you would create your usual mapping, your session, and your workflow, and there's some additional configuration required there to enable it to be a web service. So these web services, they're also hosted on the Web Service Hub, just like the batch web services. But in order to do this, you will need an additional license option. If you are not sure if you have this license option, you can check in your license in Administrator, and the option is called Real-Time Web Service. These web services, you can build them from scratch in PowerCenter, so you can create the request and the response, or the layout of the request and the response from scratch. Or if you have an existing WSDL which describes your web service interface, then you can import that in PowerCenter and use that to create your mapping and your workflow. So in your mapping, obviously, as you are talking about the web service, you would have a web service source and a target, which will be your SOAP request and your SOAP response that you need to handle. But apart from that, you can use any other PowerCenter functionality as you would do in another mapping. So if you want to use an aggregator, or you want to invoke a stored procedure, all of that is there for you. You can just use it as usual. And it's also possible to actually go and write to other targets. So for instance, you can write to an Oracle target as well in that same web service mapping or workflow. Now at the workflow level, that's where you go and configure the runtime options. You will configure the name of your web service. You've got some scalability options, scalability in terms of how many instances of my workflow do I want to be servicing requests. Obviously, if you have a web service that needs to throughput quite a lot of requests per second, you might want to look at having 3, 4, 5, or however instances required of that workflow running to service those requests within the service level agreement. And we also have real-time options. Real-time options are kind of determining the behavior of the web service and the web service underlying session. Things like how long does the session need to be running and can be reused by requests, when does it restart. So that's all done, again, at the workflow and the session level in your workflow manager. Then the other side of the story, so everything of this was hosting web services in PowerCenter, so PowerCenter being the provider. Second part of the story is a web service consumer. Web service consumer is going to be used to consume external web services. So if you have external web services in your organization, or if you have web services on the internet, you can go and use these here. How do you create a web service consumer transformation? First of all, you need the WSDL. The WSDL is the standard web service interface description that will be available for you. So you need that one to import it into your PowerCenter Designer. A web service consumer can exist in three disguises. Can either be a source, a transformation, or a target. And depending on what kind of web service you are communicating with, that will determine whether it's one of these three. So a web service consumer source will just retrieve data from a web service and just submit a static SOAP request that you kind of hard code. The web service consumer transformation as a midstream transformation will allow you to compose and send your own SOAP request and retrieve and process data coming back from the web service. The web service consumer target, the last one on the list, this one is used to just send request to web service, and we don't actually expect a SOAP response coming back from that provider. Then a final slide on PowerCenter, Web Services PowerCenter, a few tips and tricks that you might not know or you might just want some more details on. So everything I've been talking about concerns SOAP web services. So I haven't actually talked about REST at all. RESTful web services, for those who are not familiar with these, they've kind of been coming up in the last few years already, but they seem to be gaining in popularity quite quickly. It's kind of a simplified version in terms of protocol. It takes away the whole complexity of the XML structure of the messages. Unfortunately, PowerCenter doesn't support REST web services natively. So you can't connect to an existing REST web service with the web service consumer transformation. However, since the whole REST protocol is based on HTTP, what you can do is you can use a HTTP transformation to connect to your web service. So that will require some hand coding within your mapping. And if you want to get some details as to how you can get started, there is a how-to library on our My Support portal, and if you look there for using PowerCenter as a RESTful web service client, you will find the PDF with step-by-step an example. It's actually working through an example of how to connect to a RESTful web service from PowerCenter. In case you want to review SOAP requests and SOAP responses in your sessions, the simplest way to do that is just flip your session into verbose data mode, and you will be able to see the SOAP requests and SOAP responses sent and received. In order to test your own web services that you've developed, PowerCenter has a small application called Try It application. I'll show that quickly, that you can use to simply submit some SOAP requests, or if needed and for more extensive tests, we would always refer to some external utilities. One that's quite widely used in the industry is called SOAP UI, which has a free version available on this website. So I'll quickly now move over to a short demo of some of the functionality. I'll actually just start off in my PowerCenter administrator and just start off in the Web Service Hub. So as I was saying, in order to host web services, this is the service that you need to have configured. It's very straightforward. Some things to note is it needs a separate port, actually 2 ports. So separate from the node address and the administrator port that you have already defined on your node. There's different ports. It's just to be aware of in case you have firewalls that need to be configured as well. to allow you to reach these ports. And then the main thing to configure is the associated repository that you want this web service hub to work with, because this is where the web service hub will get information from, and how it will be, where it will get details from web service workflows from. That's all from the associated repository. So once you've got the service created, you'll see there's a separate URL here. There we go. And that brings you into the Web Service Hub page. And as you can see, we've got these real-time services and batch web services. And let's just start off with the batch web services. This is the metadata web service, which is, as you can see, these are all of the operations that are available. Get folders, repository, instances, integration service. Has a few more, because I said this one is slightly more interesting in the sense that it can get session logs, it can do start workflows, it can schedule a workflow, it can abort a task, so that's all possible. So if you want to implement this interface in a client, so sometimes there are some third-party scheduling utilities that actually use web services to interact with PowerCenter. So what you need to retrieve is the WSDL. If you just click on the WSDL link, you have this link here, which you can provide to any application that needs to implement it. They download the WSDL, and they have everything they need to get started in developing their client interface to us. In terms of real-time services, here you will get an overview of all the web services that you have developed yourself as a developer, as a workflow. To see valid and invalid web services, there are a few rules. So if a workflow is valid, it doesn't necessarily make it a valid web service workflow. A valid workflow can just be in a flat file to flat file workflow, but in order to be a valid web service workflow, you need to make sure that you have your web service source, you need to make sure you have your web service target. There are a few additional rules there to make sure that a web service, that the workflow is a valid web service workflow. So again here, once you get into your web service, you just click on the WSDL, and that brings you to the WSDL that you need for your clients to invoke this web service. So I was talking about the try it application. So just very briefly, this is just a very simple web interface that allows you to send requests to web service. You can either use a simple form or just edit the SOAP request itself. And as you'll see, as long as you just enter something here, this will invoke the web service, and we'll get our web service response back in this window. So let's have a closer look now at what the actual objects in the repository look like, or how you go about creating one. So let me maybe just show you first of all, this is actually the underlying mapping that I've just been invoking. We've got the web service provider source, web service provider target, which is then, these ones basically represent your SOAP request and your SOAP response. And the only thing that this particular mapping doing is just doing a lookup on a flat file for some product information. Now, how do you create these sources and targets? There's multiple ways of doing this, so I'll just show you one way here. If you go into your source analyzer, you go to sources, web service provider. So either you create things from scratch. If you just say create web service definition, you just give your web service a name, and here you go and define your input ports. And if you want, you can immediately also define your output ports. And that's all you need really to get started in developing the workflow. As soon as you have the input and the output, you have to pop those in a mapping, and then from there you go and your associated session and workflow. If you have already a WSDL available, and you just go to Web Service Provider, say import from WSDL, just import the WSDL from here, and based on the information in the WSDL, your source and your target will be created. So if we move on to the associated workflow, we'll first have a quick look at the session. So within the session, as I said, here you've got some information or some options to configure the real-time behavior, as we say. So this one actually has an idle time of 180 seconds. So meaning that if there is no request coming in for 180 seconds, then the session will just finish. If you were to configure this as -1, that will just mean that the session will be indefinitely running and waiting for new requests to come in. Stop that there. Okay, the second bit of configuration is at your workflow level. So obviously you need to enable your workflow for web services. So you just say enable here. And then in the configuration, this is where you can configure things such as do you want actual authentication to get this web service to be invoked from a client. You need to make it runnable to let people use it. And then this maximum run count per hub, together with the service time threshold, that's where you go and configure your scalability. So what this does is, for instance, you have a web service and it takes about 5 seconds to process one request. What you can say here is, if my request takes 5 seconds, then I can have up to 4 instances of my workflow running to service the request. So if the web service hub sees that your request is taking more than 5 seconds to run, it will just spawn a new instance, and that new instance will be ready to service any other requests that are coming in while the previous request is still being processed by another instance. Let's cancel out of those. Okay, so let me maybe just give you a quick demo on the whole thing together. So, or actually, let me just go back to my designer and show you another mapping. So this mapping is using the web service consumer. So what I've done here is I've gone to my web service hub. I've went to my web service, retrieved WSDL, and I've created a web service consumer transformation here. So you would do that by creating a new transformation, and then you just enter the WSDL. Designer goes and retrieves all the metadata from the WSDL. It shows, in this case, it only shows one operation, but if you have a web service that has multiple operations, you need to select the operation that you want to implement. And once you go through this, you actually get a new transformation, and as you see, it has source rows, target rows, which represent the SOAP request and the SOAP response to implement. So I've mapped this here already, so this is not doing nothing else but reading some data from a flat file, submitting it from a SOAP request, submitting it to the SOAP, to the web service as a SOAP request. It retrieves the SOAP response and just writes it back out to a flat file. So if we put everything together now, and we'll go and have a look. I'm just using SOAP UI because I mentioned it in the presentation here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to invoke the web service consumer workflow using my batch web services. So first of all, the batch web services, as I said, they need repository authentication, so you just need to send the request to sign in. What you retrieve back is a session ID, and that session ID will act as an authorization token for any subsequent request. So you log in once, and then you can reuse this session ID for all of your subsequent requests. So I just want to start my workflow. I'll just pop this down here so we can see the monitor at the same time. I submit my session ID as my authorization token, and I just submit this here now. As you can see, my web service consumer workflow has started, And as this web service consumer workflow is invoking my web service, you can see already here that my web service is also started running to service the requests. And then I'll just quickly show you here as well. What you can do is you can get the session log. So I'll just take my session ID again, go to this get session log operation, and what you get here is what you would see like in the workflow monitor when you say get session log. So all this information can just be retrieved using the web service interface. And as you can see here, what I did this as well was, as I mentioned in the presentation, when you configure your session in verbose data, you actually get to see SOAP requests and SOAP responses that have been sent. So these are the SOAP requests and SOAP responses that have been sent and received by the web service consumer transformation. Okay, so yeah, this is kind of everything I wanted to show you here in PowerCenter. So I'll move on to some more slides now regarding web services and data quality and services, and then we'll have a look at some of the options we have over there. So as everyone is aware, I assume, or if not, as from Informatica 9.x, data quality and data services is hosted on a new platform, which is the model repository service and the data integration service. And what we wanted to achieve here is to have native web service capability directly on the data integration service. So there is no longer need to create a separate service, like a web service as for PowerCenter, but the web services actually run natively on the data integration service directly. How do you create web services in data quality and data services? We have a few more options here. As you can see, you can again use an existing WSDL, which you might have available already. You can create everything from scratch. You've got a few more options here, because as you might have in PowerCenter, I was just doing a few ports. Here you can actually go and create whole hierarchies. You can have child elements, or you can even import existing XSD types. So there is a bit more flexibility here now in this new platform. And one cool feature, very nice and useful, is anything that you have already developed in your model repository service, such as a data object, or maybe if you've got a transformation, or you might even have a full maplet that is doing some data quality parsing or matching. Just by doing a few clicks, you can just deploy that directly as a web service without having to do any particular development. So anything that's there already in your model repository service, it just takes a few clicks to export it as a web service. Then one additional feature as well, which is new, is that we now support multiple operations within a web service. So in PowerCenter, when you have a web service workflow, you are limited to one operation per workflow. So what you can do here now in data quality and data services is you can have one web service, and within that web service you might have 5, 6, however many operations you need, all captured within the same web service. Looking at some more of the details, in data quality and data services, we have something that's called the WSDL Physical Data Object. So whenever you have a WSDL, it's not specifically tied to a consumer or to an actual web service. It's just a metadata object on itself. And based on that metadata object, you can go and decide what you want to do. If you want to just develop a consumer, if you want to develop a web service, you can do both using the same object. And then the main feature in developing web services or web service consumers as well, as we'll see, in data quality and services is something called hierarchical data processing. So hierarchical data processing is a small utility that you have within your transformations that will allow you to go from the hierarchical structure, which is SOAP, to a relational structure, which would be the ports in your mapping design. We also have fault handling. SOAP faults is a method used to handle exceptions in web services. So again, in PowerCenter, fairly limited support. Here you can go and define custom faults however required, or you can actually just use generic faults as well, which are using a generic fault handler. As I said, there is no web service hub here, so there is no triad application. But what you have in the developer for all of the objects in the developer, you have a data preview or a data viewer, and you can use that to visualize your web service requests and responses. Then one quick slide on consuming. I think for this part of data quality and services, I'm going to spend some more time in the actual demo, because I think it's just easier to show everything rather than put everything on slides. For consuming external web services, again, we've got a web service consumer transformation. The only difference here, as you can see on the slide, I'm talking about both a SOAP and a REST web service consumer. So in the new platform, we support REST natively out of the box. So for SOAP, the process is pretty much the same as in PowerCenter. You've got your WSDL, you import it into the developer, and you create your web service consumer transformation. The same hierarchical data processing utility, I'll show that in the demo, is used here. And also on the consumer side, just as on the provider side, we have enhanced fault handling to help you coping with exceptions. So the REST web service consumer, this one supports both JSON and XML as payloads. So what you need to do is you need to define the input and the output of the REST service, either manually or using an XSD element. And again, I'll come back to that in the demo. Just a few tips and tricks regarding web services in data services and data quality. Use your data viewer to debug your web services. You can do midstream previews of your web service. You can do end-to-end previews of your web service. So it's a very handy utility that's right there for you to use in the developer. In order to retrieve logs or statistics regarding your web services execution, these are all available in the domain monitoring tab. So there is no workflow monitor where you can quickly go and check out statistics or at your session logs. Now, all the logs are actually captured easily in domain monitoring. There's one property which might be useful once you are starting to look at more performance web services. It's called the DTM Keep Alive Time. The DTM Keep Alive Time will allow you to reuse DTM instances. When I talk about DTM, that's the actual underlying mapping execution engine. So it will allow you to reuse an instance to service multiple requests. I think by default, if you deploy a web service, I think this is set to 5 seconds only. So that means that if you have a request coming in every 10 seconds, the data integration service would need to restart an instance every single time. And as with anything, starting a job, the initialization time is quite a chunk of the whole processing time. So if you want to reduce the processing time, then you would want to look at increasing your keep alive time, so you can have your DTM execution engine reused across different web service requests. One thing that is currently not in data services and data quality is some kind of an equivalent to the PowerCenter batch web service that allows you to start schedule workflows. So there is a workaround. A workaround is actually to go back to PowerCenter and in your PowerCenter workflow, you invoke the data services or the data quality workflow using a command task. And then once you've got your PowerCenter workflow, you can go back to your usual web service, hope to use a batch web service to invoke that workflow using the web service interface. So it's kind of long-winded, but it is possible if you want to start the data services or the data quality workflow from a web service. It's possible to do it using this approach. So I'll move back to some demos now. So let me think where I'm going to start. I'm going to start in my developer. So let's quickly go back to my designer, and I'll show you again the mapping here that I had for my web service. So this was a web service that gets a SOAP response, look up on a flat file, and then gets the actual results and put them in a SOAP response. So I'll quickly show you how you can do this in developer, so in data services, data quality. So this is my physical data object for my flat file. I can have a quick preview of the data here. There's just a few records in here. So if I want to now develop this as a web service, actually very simple. I can just right click on my physical data object. I just select straight away deploy as a web service. Just need to select my data integration service where I want to deploy to. Okay, I'll just say webinar application, so webinar web service. And as you can see, what it's done here is directly created an operation for me, so product details operation. I'm happy with that name. And you can see my input and my output now. So what it's done is it's looked at the flat file physical data object, looked at the ports here, and it's giving me the option to use these ports in my web service. So for my particular use case, I just want to have the product ID as input, and as output, I just return everything. Just say finish. So this is now created, and as you can see, it's also deployed my web service directly on my data integration service. So let's go and have a look what happened behind the scenes. So you can see here in my data services, I've got now a new web service called Webinar Web Service, and with my operation, and I can show you here as well the WSDL. So this is the WSDL that has been generated to interact with my web service. So I've got my input and my output. So if I go and look now, you see you've got an operation mappings. So for each operation, so in this case I only have one operation here, you have a corresponding mapping. So you can't actually see the mapping under the mappings tab here. You actually have to go inside the web service, go to operation mappings, click on the mapping here, and it's created this web service mapping directly for me. So it has the input, the output, and it generated a lookup transformation directly for me just by having done a few clicks. So how is this web service available now? As I said, there is no web service hub anymore, so everything is deployed on the data integration service directly. So we'll go and have a look on the data integration service. Okay. Sign in on my box. This is my data integration service. I go into applications. We should see that my webinar application that I have just created a few minutes ago is up and running, and I've got my web service here. So my web service, as you can see, is again defined by WSDL and is accessible to anyone again to get the metadata and start developing the client. So that's all there is to it really. It's just a few clicks, and I mean what I've done here is just a simple physical data object. But if you have any kind of complex maplet, the same thing will be true. Just right click on your maplet, say deploy as a web service, and you're done within a few clicks. So let me think. Okay, let me just actually show you here the data viewer I was talking about. So I've got my mapping for my web service. So if I want to see how, for instance, my lookup transformation is acting based on my SOAP input, so I'll just put my SOAP request. I want to get product 3, say run. So this is submitting the SOAP request, and I am going to, if everything goes well, in my output window here, I will see the ports, so the values that are retrieved by the lookup transformation. So I can see at each, I mean, obviously I only have one transformation here, but at each and every single transformation, I can go and preview what the data would look like based on my SOAP request. So let's have a look at my WSDL Physical Data Object. So this WSDL Physical Data Object is for my web service. How can I consume this? Simply go into mapping. I'll just create a demo mapping here. I just drag and drop my WSDL. It will ask me to create a new web service consumer. So I just select the operation I want to implement. And this window here, this is what we are calling the hierarchical data processing. Now in PowerCenter, if you have a very simple web service, it's quite easy to map. Once you have web services that have quite a few hierarchies and different levels, it becomes quite complex because you have to deal with the XML views, and you might need to actually use quite a fair number of joiners to get all the information from across your views together. So that's all no longer required in data services and data quality. You actually, on my right-hand side here, I've got the hierarchical structure of the SOAP request, and on my left-hand side, I've got my relational structure, which would be the ports of the actual transformation. So the whole the mapping is done within the transformation itself. This would be a completed web service consumer here, which takes in the request and gets back the response. So I can quickly show you. This is running the data viewer again on the consumer transformation, getting back my results. And again, if I go and look in my mapping log here, I'll be able to see my SOAP request. I think I configured it. If not, no. Yeah, I haven't. So what you need to do it again is increase your tracing, and you can see your SOAP request and see SOAP responses. Okay, we are running short on time, so I'll quickly show you the REST consumers. So REST consumers, we've got two types, both XML and JSON. So let me here. Okay, so this REST consumer, I'll quickly show you the actual payload that it's retrieving. It's a very simple service that's just running on my local box. So this is basically my how I invoke my REST service. There is nothing else required, no SOAP request. This is just the only thing I submit, and this is my response that my the only thing required. So within the developer, what you need to go and create is, in this case, it's an XML. So what I've done here is I took my XML, created an XML schema out of it, and the XML schema has been imported here. And so what will happen is the XML schema will parse the XML payload, and that payload will then be transformed into normal ports in your mapping. So I can show that one here. I'll just quickly run that. And I'll show that one in the mapping, sorry, in the log file. So you can see what has been invoked. So this is my request to the REST service, nothing else to it. And this is the body of my response, which is an XML structure. XML structure is captured by the REST consumer and passed into my output ports. Same story for JSON. Again, I'll show you. So JSON, I'm just using this time service as an example. So if you invoke this, you get back a small JSON which shows the time, the milliseconds since epoch, and the date. So again, in order to define, because data services, data quality needs to know what kind of information you want to parse, what you do is either you go and define these ports yourself, or there are quite a few utilities out there online to transform this JSON structure into an XSD structure. And you go and create this one here again. So you've got your structure defined as ports. Again, we'll do a quick data preview here. And we go and have a look at the log again. There we go. So this is the request submitted, and then we've got the JSON message which came back as a response, and that has then been translated into my output ports of my consumer transformation. Okay, so it's now 10 to 5 here in the UK, so I'll be rounding up my demo here. I'll quickly have a look at the chat window for some questions. Okay. The first question I've got here is, what's the command line command for web services? Not sure what you mean by that. I mean, the web services are all deployed on the Web Service Hub. It is possible to create a Web Service Hub from a command line, I believe, is that what the question is. Data integration web service. So the data, as I said, the data integration web services in a PowerCenter concept is purely the this one. This one is called the data integration service, which allows to interact with the integration service to start workflows or to schedule workflows and all that. Do we have high availability for web services too? The Web Service Hub as such can only be deployed on one node. So you can't have the Web Service Hub running on a grid, directly running on multiple nodes, or have a HA configuration there. What you can do is you can have, let's say you have a 3-node setup in your domain, you can define a Web Service Hub on each of those nodes. And what you need to do then is you need to put an HTTP load balancer in front of the Web Service Hubs that can then dispatch the requests to each of the Web Service Hubs on each of the nodes. One more question. You have mentioned we need to have a license to create real-time web services. Can't we create some basic one? No. So that the basic license for PowerCenter allows you this bit. so the batch web service to do metadata web service and integration web service. This bit, the real-time web service, you need a license for that. Now the license is called, I'll show you in my license here. Options, you go to license options, I believe it's disadvantage of having a license with all the options. Might be in here. Okay, there we go. So web service provider, that one will be there for everyone. Then the web service provider real time, that's the one, that's the option that will allow you to create web services from workflows. So without that one, it's not possible to create any web service workflows in PowerCenter. Okay, next question I've got here is, can web service response be a form of XML or just regular string output port? I assume you talk about PowerCenter. I mean, PowerCenter will always generate a SOAP response. It's a SOAP response which is encapsulated within these ports. So, I mean, yeah, you can't just have a SOAP response coming back that's just some kind of string. If your question is it possible to write back XML as part of the SOAP envelope? Yeah, that should be possible. I mean, you would just have to create a string port here, and if you have some XML that's coming through your mapping, you can then use an XML generator to generate the XML and populate that here in one of your ports. That would be a possibility. Okay, let me just see. Can we use a single web service hub associated to RS and MRS at time from admin console? The web service hub is only working together with the repository service. It doesn't have anything to do with the model repository service. They don't work together. Web service hub is only for web services on PowerCenter. The web services in data integration service, they are deployed on the data integration service, and they work together with the MRS that's associated with the DIS. So the web service hub is completely separate from the model repository service and the data integration service. Okay, let me see. Okay, that's some clarification on the command line question. Like PMCMD or PMRep commands, do we have anything to check the connectivity from Informatica server? Okay, let me maybe just unmute the lines now.
Presentation mode is now disabled.
So Siva Prasad, if you are still on the line, would you like to clarify your question about the command lines?
Yeah, I mean, for integration service, we do have some basic tests to check the connectivity from Informatica server. So we're going to have this web services hub on the domain. So do we have any option to check from the Informatica server?
Like a ping?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can do a ping service like InfaCMD. You can do a ping directly to any of your services. So you could do if you have like an InfaCMD ping service, then you can ping the web service hub as well, I believe.
I did check that, but okay, I will check again for that.
Okay, I can have a quick look for you in the documentation. Let's have a quick look. I don't know all of the commands by heart. Let's have a quick look. So if you use ping, InfaCMD ping, pings a domain, a service, or a gateway host. So you should be able to do, as an option of the infacmd ping command, you should be able to give your service name as a web service hub name.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. Go to another question here. Is it possible to have multiple web services to a single PowerCenter repository? I suppose you mean multiple web service hubs. I believe, yes, that there is no restriction there in terms of how many you have. And then in terms of web services, you can create however many web services you need within your repository. So you can create however many web service workflows. You would get here is, rather than this one workflow, one web service I have here, you would have a whole list of all of the web service workflows that are available in your repository. So yes, it is possible to have multiple web services within one PowerCenter repository. Okay, so I think I've handled all the questions in the chat window. Are there any more questions on the call?
Can you go to the metadata web services, batch web services? Can you please click on that?
Yeah.
There you have some predefined commands, right? Get the
Correct.
logs and all. So for this, so users must have the complete access on the folders also to get the details. Whoever accessing this web services. For suppose I have a 20 folders.
If you want to do like a start workflow, then yes, I believe yes, the user will need to have the permissions on the folder and the workflow to be able to start that specific workflow.
And there is no specific way to restrict users to access this web service, right? Like the folder level permissions. We don't have any options for that, right? For this.
No, I mean, what would be done is you log in here with the PowerCenter repository user. And that user that will use the permissions on, I mean, if you have your user A and that has user A has the permissions on folder A, then it can start the workflow in folder A. But if it doesn't have permissions on folder B, then user A won't be able to start the workflow in folder B. So the permissions are taken care of at the PowerCenter repository level. Because you are signing in with a regular PowerCenter username.
Okay.
Okay, I got another question here. Can we use a RESTful API transformation from DQ and export that as a maplet in PowerCenter? No, I'm afraid not, because the functionality simply doesn't exist in PowerCenter. So you can't export that transformation and import it into PowerCenter. There's a few number of transformations, not only related to the REST API, but there are a few other transformations which are simply not supported in PowerCenter, and those wouldn't be able to get exported from DQ and imported back into PowerCenter.
So I have one question. For the login, does it have to be a native user, or can it go against LDAP?
It can go against LDAP. I can show you here actually. So in the login operation, as you can see, you've got your namespace here for your user. So could be the native namespace, could be any of the other namespaces that you have associated with an LDAP. So that's fine.
Thanks.
Okay, any further questions? Okay, in that case, thank you everyone for attending this webinar. I hope it's been useful. As I said, what will happen is you will receive a link to the recording of this WebEx, just in case you want to go and review something. You will also receive a short survey. If you have a few minutes, it would be great if you can just submit your feedback there. And then I'd say keep an eye open on the on the My Support portal for the next webinar next month. I'm not sure what it is yet, but it should be announced shortly. So thanks everyone. Have a nice night, evening, or morning, day, wherever you are based. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sam.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.